G'day, it's Kareem here and Does It Matter again? Um, China, coronavirus, and some of the ramifications that that might have economically and socially for us down the track. Um, I'll get the more controversial suggestion out of the way because I think it's plausible, I think it's possible, I don't think it's incredibly likely, but it's not really an either or proposition. I am suggesting that due to the coronavirus's impact on the Chinese economy, which has been huge, and its impact on other economies may be even greater, the costs of this latest of a series of global epidemics and pandemics seems to be rising, and that's another issue which I'll cover a little bit later. But um, China's worrying a lot right now, and China's trade partners in the US, Australia, Canada, Europe are also starting to hurt, and they will hurt increasingly over the next few weeks, even after production ramps back up. There will be shortages within the Chinese economy for parts that they need to, in order to get their factories back up and running. There will be stockpiles that need resorting in docks. There will be things that get lost. Corruption is always a feature of any economy, particularly China's. Um, there'll be things that are damaged that have been left out in the weather. I mean, all these things happen on a scale that is kind of hard to understand. You know? So it will be quite a while before things return to normal, even after the coronavirus has burned itself out or been under control. And there doesn't seem to be any sign that it is going to burn itself out in a hurry. There are some suggestions that most of us will get it at some point in time, and increasingly it seems like our inability to get the incubation period correct. It's not 14 days, apparently now it's 27 days. They seem to be making a lot of guesses in relation to that, and maybe that's unavoidable. Um, Nonetheless, China's wearing the initial impact of this, and they're wearing it hardest. And they have certainly the most to lose in the early stages of this, and it makes me wonder how they will react to this in terms of economic policy over the next 6 to 12 months. Um, it's not unreasonable to suggest they might eke out already difficult resupply and reinitiation of production schedules. They might eke out that returning production in some areas in order to potentially boost China's ailing rate of growth, and force some renegotiations in terms of trade and um, contractual parameters with their trade partners. It's it's not something. Let's just say this: China's run by politicians, and politicians never allow an opportunity to go to waste, particularly when that opportunity comes out of for them, an economic disaster and a social disaster as well. Um, Xi Jinping is already having rumours, apparently, and rumbles within the party, um, and on top of a few other issues like the bad press for the Uyghurs, and not looking particularly great during his trade war fracas with Trump. This is the last thing he needed, so there might be some incentive to make some credit up out of this disaster, and good politicians are always good at that. That's what they do. Being able to somehow get his foreign partners, to wear more of the cost of this disaster, and being able to do it with effectively a get out of jail free card, because they were the first ones to actually, and by far, suffer the largest costs from this pandemic. So it could end up being potentially something of a silver lining for China in enabling it to renegotiate not just some short or even medium but longer term trade conditions. Demand reacts to supply. Supply gets pinched. China can eke it out a little bit here and there. They can potentially not only recover costs over time but also strategically improve their position relative to their partners. An awful lot of their partners are realizing now just how much we depend on those thousands, probably tens of thousands of factories and supply docks and warehouses that are now silent and empty because of this pandemic. It's never the same to recognize something on the books and in numbers. It's not the same as when your factory is empty, when you're paying workers to do nothing or laying them off and hoping they'll be there when you need to put them back on. It's never the same as when your shop is empty and the rent keeps coming, the bills keep coming, nothing stops. It's at that point in time that you realise just how vulnerable you are, indeed the world is, to being supplied by so few places like China, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India. These are particularly China is the largest conglomeration of such production facilities, and we're horribly dependent on them, which will tackle the second point that I'll make, and that is how the corporate world, not just the Western world, but the corporate world will react to these events and the pronouncements by the WHO and CDC that we can expect possibly an increase and certainly a continuation of these waves of diseases sweeping across our highly connected, transport-ridden world. This might be putting some ideas in people's heads that have already been there and were already underway, programs underway, and now they might be getting a shot of steroids. I'm actually fairly certain of that. I think that coronavirus is the kind of thing that tends to spur economies to change direction or ramp up their already existing trends into much faster reforms. So yeah, could China be taking advantage of this? Yes, I think they could be. Are they? Who knows? We'll find out over the time to come. Could Xi Jinping be using this to could he use this somehow to recapitalise his failing stock within the party? Maybe. Am I overplaying how badly he's doing within the party? Possibly, but it's worth keeping an eye on over time. Now, the second point I'm making is for me, it's a much more important one, is that the corporate world has just found out how much it needs China, particularly, and how much it needs China's production facilities. And I don't think it's going to change in a hurry. I think over time we'll see production shift more evenly around the world due to automation. But I also think that the amount of investment that's gone into China by other countries, by corporations and private sector is so enormous that it would not be something that could easily be redirected anytime soon. It would be the process of decades to shift that pattern across. I do think, though, that there's a common feature of these plagues which are predicted to increase, and even if they don't, just the nature of the fact that we can't stop people travelling back and forth. Increasing numbers of people are travelling and educating and even moving back and forth between nations. Global borders are becoming increasingly porous. It seems to me that we are looking at a world that, until we have some technological breakthroughs relevant to this, and that will take some time, we're looking at a world that isn't likely to be able to stop these pandemics from sweeping through, which means that treatment, local conditions, local quarantines and treatment pathologies will probably become more and more important over time. Borders really aren't at all capable of stopping diseases. They never really have been. And the whole idea that we can stop them with the amount of boats, ships, and thousands of planes crossing our airspace and landing from one part of the world to the other in a few hours, that's just, we were never going to be able to stop it. But there's one factor that's universal to that. Who are on these planes? Who are on these ships? Who's getting sick? People. Us. And if you don't think that corporates are now looking at their suffering bottom lines and considering the fact that, once again, it's the labour force that is posing a problem for them. The labour force is their biggest cost by a mile, and the labour force is their largest liability as well. And it has manifested an even greater potential as a liability with this vulnerability to diseases that we can't instantly cure, and we're a long way from ever being able to do that. So the push for automation, which I have spoken about in previous videos and I'll speak about again in the next couple of videos, is going to ramp up like a guy on steroids. It's going to be ramped up. I predict that over the next few years we will see a vast increase via the Chinese oligarchs and their corporate friends here and elsewhere in the West to remove as much as possible liabilities that pinch production. They control the means of production, and they're vulnerable to any hindering of that means of production. So it makes sense that they would ramp up their plans, which have been in the making since the 90s, to remove and eventually not require a labour force other than a very small, highly skilled one that is less likely to impact on them. If you lose a few techs, there's always a few more techs to replace them. If you can always find more engineers. It's really hard to find 5,000 trained machinists and lab assistants to suddenly work in your bio lab or your factory. That's going to be enormously difficult. It's just not possible. And when you lose enough people, or if enough people are just simply quarantined and unable to get to work, production becomes non-existent. So I think they could also get away with it because the loss of services, the loss of production, the loss of consumption, the empty shelves frighten the hell out of people. And I think a lot of people will actually accept automation they'll give it their blessing after seeing the societies teetering on the edge of insolvency and collapse. And it doesn't take very long. Even if those societies are more resilient than we can perceive, and they usually are, going to your supermarket and finding it empty, eating a lower standard of food and having a lower standard of living for a few weeks because things are really tough, is a terrifying thing for a relatively affluent Western public, and I suspect for any public, even for the Chinese who have only recently gained some of those benefits, they won't want to lose them again in a hurry. So this is precisely the kind of PR that automation requires in order to push into those areas. Again, mass unemployment is still going to be the result, but they'll be able to justify it, and governments will be able to see that many governments are already moderately hostile. Many conservative and right-leaning governments are moderately hostile to the labour market anyway. They see it as a necessary evil, and this is just going to be, again, a shot of steroids into that particular inclination already. These pandemics, if they occur more frequently, as predicted by World Health Organization and CDC, they're going to become an intolerable pattern in global trade. And if I can see it, I'm no genius. If I can see it, they've already seen it. The smart guys on Wall Street and elsewhere have already seen it. They're already wondering what to do. Robots don't get sick, and you can go sort of Japanese Zaibatsu style if you want to and build corporate suburbs like they've already got in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere, green zones, where there's shops and malls and everything that people need to live there, schools, university campuses, everything. And you can quite easily isolate your highly skilled workforce there that are operating your largely mechanised and automated factories. And as a result, production can continue in the middle of a disaster that could be killing millions, and you can still be, for a while at least, until you run out of customers, you can be churning out. And that's going to be the first thing on their mind. 2 or 3 bad quarters are all that separates a successful company from a hostile takeover. So it's got to be on their minds, and one day we might actually see that work suburbs and contracted populations that sacrifice some of their freedoms in order to have guaranteed income, guaranteed accommodation in these work suburbs. I don't know. I could be, I could have been reading too much Solzhenitsyn, but I do feel that it's a possibility that we have to consider, and we have to look at how the wealthy and the powerful are going to react to these incredible impacts on their ability to do business. And the world runs on business. The one thing that conquered the world when politics and religion failed was money, economics. Money rules the world. We all trade in the same economic system, all of us, every single country on the planet. We differ in religion, we differ in cultural beliefs, we differ in political systems. We don't differ in economic systems. Even the controlled economies of China have had to deregulate largely and have had to play in the same global milieu, even if they have more local control than we do. It's all the same now, and the people that run who run that business, I don't believe are going to be particularly tolerant of these things, these plagues to come. Thanks for that. More later from Doesn't Matter.